The issue that I raise, I'd like to get a nod of 5 to ask the staff to analyze the impact of the ICE program, Secure Communities, on local law enforcement and safety in our community, and report back to us in a month or so. Are there 5?
That would be Mark Beckner and the police in particular, what the impact would be from their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Jane would assign it, but that's, because as I read the materials, having had the concerns expressed that we heard earlier tonight, I felt like evaluating this program really requires a law enforcement perspective. And so anyway, I'd like to get 4 of my other colleagues to
Questions?
authorize staff to do that.
What's the timing on this? I mean, my understanding is that the governor will make a decision on the trial. Could you just give a little, why now? Why do we need to do this now? Why can't we wait and see what the governor does, et cetera, et cetera?
I have sent a couple of emails to Alice Madden, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the governor, in the last 2 or 2.5 weeks. She asking what the timing is, and I was not able to get a response from her because she's on vacation. My guess is that the governor is waiting to act until after the election sometime.
And so why aren't we?
Well, because, you know, there are cities that have looked at in the hotline email I sent an editorial from the New York Times, which referenced several of the cities. You heard about some of them tonight, that think that this is a bad idea for law enforcement. A couple of those cities are from red states, Salt Lake City, Alexandria. A couple are from blue states or blue areas, Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. And there are others who think that this is going to negatively impact local law enforcement and the place of local law enforcement in the community, and express particular concerns with respect to the families that are impacted by domestic violence. So it may be that we want to state a position with the governor, either that this is a good program that we think would be helpful with the local issues that we have, or that it's not, that it would hurt law enforcement within our own community. And that's, I think it would be really important to hear from. I don't have a preconceived idea or position on this, but I think that we need to inform ourselves about it.
Casey?
I was a little unclear on whether if the governor goes forward with this, we actually get to opt out or not.
With the pilot program, we do.
With the pilot you do, but not in 2013.
Only
No, ultimately, it will become mandatory unless Congress changes this.
And so, isn't this something staff will be looking at anyway then? Maybe not at this moment, but potentially based on what the governor does.
It's actually not clear whether there's an opt-out provision or not.
Sure.
That's what I'm
I mean, that's something that is, I think it's worth Mark Beckner and our staff to look into. But whether or not a city can opt out is not clear. San Francisco was told they cannot opt out, though California's signed up for the pilot program.
Crystal?
I'm going to support you, Megan. I think it's important that we get information gathered, get input from the chief, and be proactive so we can have an informed discussion.
Talk to the chief today.
Susie?
Megan, did you think at all about this being part of our discussion for our state and federal legislative agenda? Because it seems to me that that would be a much more appropriate context for this than to pull it by itself. It is part of, at least in my mind, it's part of a larger set of issues around immigration. It's one piece. And so I know there's potentially some changes that are being thought about there. And if we were to decide as a council that we wanted to act on this, it would seem to me that what we would need to do is request that our congressional delegation work to get this repealed, because as I understand it, it's law, and it will go into effect in 2013, regardless of whether Colorado decides to participate in a pilot program or not. So, to me, that seemed more logical, and it would be discussed in a broader context. Did you think about that?
I did. If there is a position that the city would want to take with respect to whether we should be in the pilot program for 2 years, then it's probably something we'd want to know earlier than we adopt our legislative agenda sometime in December. And that's why, I'm thinking that the governor may be making a decision for this in November, and so that it would be important for us to inform ourselves about this program before December.
So one doesn't
When are we bringing up
preclude the other.
when are we bringing up the federal and
Right.
state legislative agenda? Isn't that in November?
Just looking
Yes,
for our
it is in
meeting
November.
here.
I think it's at our, either our first study session or our second meeting in November.
But again, one doesn't, I don't have a determined opinion on this, but one doesn't preclude the other. It sounds like there's kind of two fronts here. One is the short term, do we want to make any sort of recommendation to the governor in terms of the pilot project? That's true no matter what. And then, yes, Susie, I agree that kind of bigger picture or longer term is, do we have a position that we would take to our congressional delegation? But I don't know that doing the latter means you shouldn't or couldn't do the former.
No, I guess where I was coming from,
So
it makes
it's
more
going to be
Oh, sorry.
November 9th.
Okay.
We have a study session that will include 2 items. One of them is legislative agenda.
I guess the position I'm putting forward is that it makes more sense to me that we consider this in the context of a larger set of immigration issues. And I'll say that for me, I put this in a broader context, which is I don't like dealing with these issues of national or foreign policy issues piecemeal, particularly when I know we're struggling with broader immigration issues. And there are other things we may want to ask our staff to look at with regard to other issues on immigration. So pulling this one out doesn't make sense to me right now. It does make sense if we want to look at it within the larger context. So I'm not inclined to give you a nod of 5 for this. I would be inclined to say we're interested in the broader context of our agenda, of our legislative agenda, potentially. But that's sort of where I am.
Susie, I think that's a good point, and the other point that I just, does Boulder have the ability to affect this debate? I mean, is Boulder going to be able to say something or demonstrate something to Governor Ritter that he's not otherwise going to know or hear? And it seems like there's been, I don't know, that there's a lot of analysis out there. Otherwise, what we're doing is making a point and not a difference, and I don't know that that's what we intend to do.
So just from a practical standpoint, it sounds like, since the study session is a month away, I mean, it would seem reasonable to have that information regardless at the study session, to get some information from our law enforcement people as to how this might or might not impact them and the concerns they have. And then at that study session, we can decide how to proceed, which could be not at all. It could be through the legislative arena. It could be with some recommendation to Governor Ritter. But the timing it's going to be the same either way, making you've asked for kind of a month that happens to be a month away. So maybe it's going to happen anyway, assuming that, that, I don't know if that was part of the assumption as to what we talk about at the legislative study session or not, but it sounds like we should, and it sounds like we should get some advice from the chief.
So we do have immigration issues as part of that state and federal legislative agenda. And the dates really dovetail. So probably the research that we do and that particular meeting are going to come together, so.
So does that work for you, Megan?
Well, I still want to get the nod of 5 because I would point out that the context for this is not legislation. It is an act that the governor could take which would bind local law enforcement.
But
as I
that's
understand it.
something we would discuss at our,
Yeah, we discussed that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of our legislative
I
agenda.
mean, in a way, it's
So
like a
with- but-
lobbying effort on
Right.
behalf of a
Exactly what it
cause,
would be.
and that's the way we come to those positions is through our legislative agenda. But we're talking about a month, we're talking about November 9th, and we're asking for some information from the chief about the effect
Right.
of this on, yeah, Ken?
The other thing, it would be nice if someone like Sheriff Joe Pelly chimed in on this. He certainly had what I thought was the most thought-out opinion on the Arizona law that he wrote in an op-ed with Jared Polis. I thought that was very good analysis. I would sure love to hear what he thinks about this one before we spend any additional time on it. Anyway, that's just another thought, because I tend to agree with Susie and others that the timing for this is better.
So why don't we not, if you are interested in having a piece of the November 9th session be a short report from,
Should we do that do we need to do that
Well,
after do we need a public?
hearing for nods?
No, not for
No,
now.
No.
If not a motion, we
It's not a
don't.
motion.
So all in favor nod
For November?
for November 9th?
Sure.
Okay.
No reason not to.
Makes it simple.